Good morning. Welcome to the Philadelphia Association of CDC's Forward Equitable Development Conference Conversation number 2, featuring Dr. Andre Perry and Jamira Burley. We're delighted to have you with us today. We want to take a couple minutes just to thank our sponsors, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, City of Philadelphia Division of Housing and Community Development, the John and James Knight Foundation, and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. We also want to thank you for walking with us on this journey again as we launch this conversation to help explore how we implement equitable development practices in our work every day. Many years ago, when we launched the equitable development work that we are so well known for in our community, we had an advisor, we had a national advisory team, and one of the individuals on that team, Dr. Bernard Anderson, challenged us to think very differently about how we were approaching our equitable development work. He said right up front, you can't think about equity unless you think about race, and really put the work behind that to make that effective. And lo and behold, so many years later, and after millions and millions of dollars raised and advocated for and programs implemented, we are still in the same place we were, thinking about race. And so we've asked Dr. Perry and Ms. Burley to help elevate this conversation for us still further. 8 years ago, we started on a journey to try to figure out how community development can play a role in making sure that everyone is prosperous in the communities they live and work in. And how do we sustain that prosperity long term? And here we are now in the face of an international pandemic and worldwide strife, faced with those same issues. But we have a little bit more knowledge, and we have some more tools. And so we're thankful for this opportunity shared with you, this extraordinary opportunity to converse and learn with Dr. Perry and Ms. Burley. We ask you also to join and stay with us after their conversation is done today at 12 noon for a series of workshops that think about and work and talk about this effort and how you implement it on the ground with some really powerful and innovative approaches. Those workshops will begin at 12, or they'll end around 1:30. And you can access those workshops in your chat box. Each individual workshop has a link that will take you directly to it, as well as in the reminder email that you got for reminding you about today's conversation. We thank you very much for joining us. We thank Dr. Anderson for helping to shine a light on the work that we really still need to be doing. And we thank you for always rolling up your sleeves and continuing to do the important work on the ground, helping so many people and making all of our communities stronger and better for it. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Again, we wanted to welcome you again, and also we are delighted to have Miss Anea Moore, a Southwest Philadelphian, who recently graduated from the University of Penn and is now a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, pursuing advanced studies in comparative social policy through the lens of racial equity. We're delighted to have Anea here, and we look forward to hearing what all of the panelists have to say. Anea?
Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so glad that all of you could join us. Before we hop into the conversation, just want to send out a few quick reminders. If you have a Twitter and if you like to use it, and you hear different things that you like during the conversation today, feel free to use the hashtag #EquitablePhilly. If you have a question for any of the panelists or myself, you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom that there's a Q&A bar. And you can use that space to ask any questions that you may. Just want to add a quick caveat. We might not be able to get to all questions today, but we'll definitely be looking through them and asking some of them as the conversation goes on. And then finally, in regards to the chat function, don't drop your questions there. Any comments, anything that you hear, or if you just want to express yourself, feel free to use the chat function, and we'll definitely, all the panelists and all the attendees can actually see that as well. And so I'd just like to say, once again, thank you all for being here. And I am happy to introduce Dr. Perry and Ms. Burley, and they will have quick intros for about the next 8 minutes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, and shout out to Pamela, as well as the Philadelphia Association for Community Development and Corporation for organizing this discussion. I think to Pamela's point, we're at an interesting moment within this country, within this world, where it's becoming increasingly obvious those who have been pushed to the very margins of our society continue to not have access to the very basic needs that they deserve in order to fully participate in society. And as someone who is born and raised in Philadelphia, Philadelphia was my first love. I like to think I represent both the best and the worst that Philadelphia has to offer, because Philadelphia is one of those places that tend to both raise you as well as spit you out and make you ready for the rest of the world. And I say that to say, I'm someone who grew up in West Philadelphia, went to Overbrook High School. My claim to fame is that Will Smith went to my high school many years before me. But it's a place in which I learned very much about myself, not only as an individual who has shown up in this world as a Black woman in this country, but more importantly, my role and my responsibility to do this work and to continue to elevate the stories, the issues of those who are most impacted, to ensure that we create solutions for those who are at the margins and not those who are already have access to the resources, the opportunities, and the platform. I grew up in West Philadelphia for most of my life, surrounded by 15 siblings. I see your face. 15 siblings who, for me, I was lucky. And I think that is the opposite of what we think about when we think about equity, right? And equitable change and equitable resources and opportunities, is that I was the lucky one out of my 15 siblings who were able to not get caught up in the criminal justice system, not get caught up in violence happening in my community, and really be able to carve out a space in the pathway for me to graduate high school and to later on to go to college, and then to turn back and think about what is my role in ensuring that other young people who look like me have those same resources. And so I'm excited to be a part of this conversation, because I don't want young people to have to be lucky to graduate from high school, to not be impacted by violence, to not to be able to get access to college or workforce development and to move into a career. But more importantly, I don't want our communities to have to be lucky in order for them to have the resources and opportunities they need in order to cultivate a society in which we can reimagine with safety, with education, what justice looks like for Black and Brown folks, at a time in which Black and Brown folks continue to be pushed to the margins, continue to be oppressed, and continue to not have what they need in order to be able to show up as adequately as they deserve. And so I'm looking forward to the discussion questions, and I'm looking forward to my fellow colleagues who are going to share more on how we can hopefully move the city. And, you know, Philadelphia has always set the stage for the rest of the country. And I like to think that if we do it well and we do it good here, we can ensure that the rest of the world shows up accordingly.
Well, thank you. I'm going to just jump right in. I'm Andre Perry. I'm a fellow at the Brookings Institution. I want to thank all the organizers for putting this important event together. I'm also from Pennsylvania. I'm from the other side of the state, Pittsburgh, but I have a deep appreciation for all my family in Philly and elsewhere. And I also just want to send my thoughts, prayers to anyone suffering from COVID. I know we'll be talking about Black neighborhoods, and Black neighborhoods are disproportionately impacted by COVID because of structural racism. And so I just want to always send out acknowledgement of the hurt and suffering people are going through. You'll hear me talk a lot about the narratives that are put forth about the conditions of Black cities. It's a white supremacist myth that says that the conditions of Black cities and neighborhoods are a direct result of the people in them. When you look at the conditions and the state of Black neighborhoods and cities, it's really because of a lack of investment, because Black people are devalued. My research is over the last few years in particular have pinpointed how Black assets, Black people are devalued and robbing us of billions in resources that are used to lift ourselves up. You know, and you'll hear me say this in this particular forum, that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. And so when we look for strategies to build up our communities. Let's not blame Black people. Let's address the policies and practices that throttle our growth. And so I'm going to leave it at that. And I'm looking forward to getting right into this conversation.
Okay, thank you for those beautiful intros, everyone. I just have a quick first question. As attendees were registering for this conference, some of them described what their, I don't want to say perfect, but what their ideal world would be like if they had no constraints, no anything, you know, that they could just make the world that they wanted to live in. And I want to read some of those quotes really quickly. One person said, "I would make a world where all people are truly free." Someone else said, "I would make sure that everyone had clean water to drink and fresh air to breathe without pollution and protect that for the future." Another person said, "I would like to live in a world where we defund the police and eliminate prisons." Another person said, "I want to live in a world where white people are committed to dismantling the institutions that protect white privilege at the expense of Black and brown people." And then finally, I have a quote here that says, someone said, "I want to live in a world where there's quality housing, health access, and education for all." I think I particularly connect with that last quote. I am the child of a mother and a father who are now gone. I lost both of my parents when I was a teenager. My father died in a segregated hospital that was very poorly rated. That hospital was 20 minutes away from my home, and the night that he died, it took us a very long time for the paramedics to get there. I'm also no less than 9 months later, my mother died from a heart attack. She didn't have health care. And so like many Black women do not, it's estimated that actually every year 50,000 Black women die from heart disease in that country. That's 137 deaths per day. And my mother was one of those back in 2015. And experts are also estimating that by 2050, Black families, the median wealth will be approximately $0, while they're estimating for white families, it'll exceed that. It'll exceed approximately $100,000 during that time period. And so I am thinking more and more about how education, healthcare, wealth, investment, and community development, and how we can bring that all together for a more equitable world in our future. And so my question is to you all, it might be a rather simple one and a complicated one, which is if you all also had no constraints, you know, and if you could reimagine the world and look through a lens of, you know, intentional focus on the Black American community and the neighborhoods that they live in, what role do you see the community development sector playing in advancing that, you know, that perfect world, that world that you would create? Thank you.
You know, I'm gonna take a shot at this. I've learned so much from Afrofuturists, particularly Mother Octavia Butler of the movement, that the folks who could see beyond ourselves, beyond racism to a certain extent, the ability to imagine spaces and claim spaces that are truly our own. I think when you read off many of the quotes, you heard people say that they want the basic things that everyone wants. They want clean water, clean air, safe environments where police aren't harassing you. I mean, these are basic things that we should all enjoy. So much of our life has been built around combating racism. And so for me, you know, I do want to see urban planners, community development folks sort of work with Afrofuturists to build a future, to claim space for us, not in the image of someone else, not to focus on combating racism, but spaces that are designed for us and who we are. And we are always in a state of becoming. But for me, if I could wave a magic policy wand, it would be to have the the urban planners who are thinking about developing communities based on our existence and nothing more. That would be great for me.
Yeah, it's when I originally read that question, I think I would have had a very different answer prior to Trump than I do now. And I think a part of that is because when I started my activism, I always thought I wanted to work within institutions, right? Change institutions for those outside of institutions. And if there's anything that I've learned over the last 15 years is that we have to destroy those institutions, right? That those institutions are actually rooted in white supremacy. It's actually rooted in keeping communities, marginalized communities marginalized. And so a part of me, as I think about this question, is what would an equitable world look like is one, reevaluating what each of those things that folks have mentioned look like in a world in which institutions that currently exist no longer exist, right? So when we think about defunding the police, well, how do we define safety for our communities? Does it look like mental health? Does it look like better educational opportunities? And to Andre's point, which I really appreciate, is the idea that we have to get past the point in which we keep asking for just the basic needs and start envisioning a world in which these things already exist, because I think that will allow for people's imagination to go far beyond their own circumstances, especially at a time in which it feels like our institutions that we've relied on for so long are currently now being crippled by an entity that very much benefits from those institutions existing. So it's a weird juxtapose that we find ourselves in. But for me, at the core, what I think about what would this world look like, one would eliminate whiteness. Whiteness is the root of all evil, right? The idea in which there is a difference between white people and Black people, Asian, Hispanic, right? That there is a separation. And I think when we can get past recognizing that race is not a thing, then we can start reimagining how we each of us show up while appreciating our heritage, but not being bounded by the racial constraints that were created to continue to keep people of color, particularly Black folks, at the margins.
You know, I just want to piggyback on something there is, you know, whiteness is truly draining our material and emotional resources in ways that, you know, is hurting us. And so we should deconstruct whiteness, because it's the privileging of whiteness that is taking away our ability to accumulate wealth, that it's creating a drag on the economy, that creates employment discrimination, housing discrimination. It's something that's built in the systems that are built to give us a quality of life, and it's not. And so any new world that we live in, new communities that we live in, we've got to defund whiteness in its many different forms.
And also, just to add to that, I think it's important for those who are allies in this conversation who are watching, particularly white folks, right, is to recognize that putting whiteness on a pedestal actually negatively impacts you as well, right? If we look at the financial crash of 2008, where we know that one of the reasons was because it was predatory loans put on Black and brown communities. They were not being able to pay it back. It forced the entire economy to collapse. We all lost money in that because of it. And so I think it's really important that as we recognize that this is not just about Black folks, right? This is about cultivating a community in which we all can live without having to be constrained by whiteness. And that actually, in the long run, benefits us all. I mean, I would just assume that races were just like exhausted by now. Like, it's been hundreds of years. Y'all not exhausted? Y'all don't want to try something else? Do something different?
I also just want to add quickly, 2 quick points. I think how that, you know, we're talking to a lot of Philadelphians here, particularly a lot of white Philadelphians, many of whom, you know, might be middle-aged with, you know, school-aged children. And something that I've just been thinking about recently and that I was talking to a friend about the other day is there is the proliferation of this idea among white middle-class Philadelphians that, oh, you know, there are segregated schools in Philadelphia and we're going to send our white children to these segregated schools. That way those schools will get more resources. I did a lot of my undergraduate research on this. And in some ways, you know, they do bring more resources. There is more investment. I've read a bunch of literature on like parent-teacher associations, parent-teacher organizations, and how, you know, they can really funnel resources into the school. But something that I do want to point out is that I truly do not believe that a school needs to be socioeconomically integrated or racially integrated in order for it to have resources. Is it a benefit for all of our children to learn from each other and their different backgrounds? Sure, but I don't think that is a precursor for any child to have resources, what type of classmate they have or that they do not have. And that is, you know, certainly an idea that is very common in Philadelphia and very common in not Black communities, and very common among people who do not live in Black communities and think they know what's best for them.
Because it centers whiteness. It says that white people, because of where they are in their space in society, they have the ability to bring resources to underprivileged. And I would also say is that doesn't change systems, right? What happens when your child graduates out of those institutions? Like, how are you still showing up for that community? You should be utilizing your vote, utilizing your tax dollars to put more pressure versus centering your whiteness as the savior to end school problems.
We have
you know, there's a little bit of myth busting we need to always do around this, the arguments around integration. The people broke down segregation because it was the structure in which white people hoarded resources. You know, certainly we wanted Martin Luther King Jr. Lots of folks talked about the social benefits of learning together. But understand at the core of an integration argument is that whites have gerrymandered in the past and present in many gerrymandered school districts to hoard resources. We can come up with new ways to distribute funds. We do not have to have local districts essentially collecting the property taxes being dedicated to their particular area. It can, like in healthcare, states distribute resources based on more of an equity frame, and we can do that in education as well. But we have to recognize that the structure of segregation manifests itself in hoarding in the form of school district resources and other ways that have been used in the past and to uplift some and suppress others. And I just also want to be clear that so many communities are essentially built to keep Black people out of the economy, out of the neighborhoods, and that's the problem. It's that we literally built communities to exclude people, and so any organization committed to community development also has to be committed to deconstructing those systems that relegate Black people to certain areas, certain functions, and certain resources.
Before I move on to some questions about you guys' specific work, we have a question from an attendee. If I pronounce anyone's name wrong, I'm very sorry, attendees. I'm trying my best. From Linda Richardson, we have, how do we work to change institutions while still inside those institutions?
So I think as someone who's worked within like the educational institutions, government institutions, and like traditional UN agency institutions, I think the question you should ask yourself is, one, is it possible for that institution to change, right? Whether it's a local institution, a national, or a federal agency, it's like, is it possible for you as an individual within the position that you have to be able to change? And I realized very early on that I alone could not change those institutions. I could do what I could while being there, but then I had to realize that oftentimes my being there as a Black woman provided legitimacy to all the negative things they continue to do. That being said, I still think there is power in having people in spaces and places that can open doors to the more radical voices to be able to push for a change externally and internally. But I think you have to evaluate is, are you in a position to actually cultivate change? And if you're not, are you in a position to be able to do what you can while you're there without allowing that institution to break you?
Yeah, you know, I've been in several institutions, mainstream institutions, worked within them, and I say this all the time. You know, don't use yourself up to the point where you can't help a community. You know, we a lot.
I think Dr. Perry
For
is
me, I make sure that we are. Oh, did I break up there?
Yeah, we lost you for about 10 seconds.
Okay, sorry about that. But I was just saying that we are constantly giving ourselves to our organizations, and then a lot of folks don't have a lot left in the tank, and you see a lot of negative consequences for that. And so, yes, continue doing fighting the fight within your organization. Leverage the allies you have in that organization. Know that there's sometimes a senior person that can help you. You don't have to do it on your own. But I also say this, you're not going to die if you leave your organization. Sometimes it's great for you to build and advance it, and you realize that it can only go so far. Sometimes you have to move on. And so for me, take care of ourselves. I know when you're in this work, there is no sort of happy work-life balance, really. I mean, we're constantly being taxed by racism, but work with people internally, organize internally. But sometimes you have to leave if it's not working out for you. But it's hard work because we're trying to get mainstream institutions to defund whiteness, so to speak, within their own institutions. And I'm not immune to that. I work at the Brookings Institution, you know, the top think tank in the world, and a lot of that is predicated on exclusivity. And so for me, you know, I need to do my share in making sure that there's more Black perspectives, more Black people in my institution, and I need to fight for that, even if it means risking my job, but also knowing that I'm not going to shrivel up and die because of that. And good things happen if we are committed to working on these issues.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to that. I think this topic, what the points that we've been discussing here are some of the, I'm young, I should say that, I'm 22, you know, just straight out of college just a year ago. And I've been thinking a lot about this. You know, I went to the University of Pennsylvania. It's Philly's local Ivy League institution. It's got a $14 billion endowment, $6 billion operating budget a year. I went there because it gave me a full ride. It was one of the only institutions that I applied to that had the financial capability to give me a full ride. And I think I think the greater forces, God, different people every day for the chance to come out of undergrad with no loan. But I have also been constantly questioning how Penn, an institution built on whiteness, an institution built on exclusivity, an institution that was made for rich white men, the sons of the elite all the way back in the 1700s, how they often enough don't do the work for the Philadelphia school district, for the people that they are gentrifying, for the Black people that they have pushed out, and who they'll say that they don't have to do that work because they'll hold students like me up and say, well, look, we have this poor Black girl that became a Rhodes Scholar. We helped her get there. And so everything's good. Penn's doing great work. And so I've had to question, even if your workplace, your educational institution, your whatever is constantly rewarding you and pushing you up, are they bringing all your people with you? And is the institution bringing all your people with you and all the people? And if it's not your people, all the people that you know should be assisted and uplifted, are they bringing them with you and with your work? And that's a constant question I think we have to ask ourselves. Okay, I just want to ask any final comments before I move on to some more specific questions about your work? Okay, great. So first question I have is for Dr. Perry, and it is in your recent book, Know Your Price, you write specifically, Black communities need to go beyond traditional community and real estate development, and that developers should build community. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah, investment in or typical community development has focused on brick and mortar, not people. You know, and when you invest in brick and mortar and not people, you encourage gentrification. Investments in place and not people generates gentrification. And so we need community development that actually focus on developing people, centering Black people. And that's a series of reforms that we have yet to do. And so, yes, we need direct investments in the typical assets you see in communities, businesses, homes, for instance. But we also need to invest in the community goods that Black people utilize. So the services, the family structures, the practices that are idiosyncratic to Black folk that have benefited us. We should seek to invest in those structures, just like any other asset, anything else you can exchange for quality of life improvements. And so for me, it's to say, let's stop focusing on creating tax structures so folks can invest in brick and mortar types of things, inanimate objects. Let's figure out ways to invest in people by cutting checks so that folks can purchase homes, start businesses, send their kids to college. These are the things that when I talk about community development, it's about investing in people. And that's where we need to go.
Next question that I have is, Jamira, you've led youth activism locally and at a national scale. How are you seeing young people lead in the space of racial equity in particular? And what are some immediate ways we can collectively or individually support youth involvement within our communities and also within our own circles of friends and family?
I'll start that question from the end to the front. One I will say is, young people are the experts of their own experience. Move out of the way. They have not move out of the way in the sense of stop assuming that they need you to be able to speak on behalf of them or to imagine what they want in the world without asking them and without including them in the process. So that means in the ideation, in the development and implementation, in the rollout, as well as in the accountability and the evaluation of whether or not a program and initiative was successful. And so at every stage, young people have to be at the table when decisions about them are being made. And I've worked with young people as young as 7 all the way up to what the UN still qualifies as 35. So I'm still young for a little bit longer. Not according to my sister, but I'm still young. And what I will tell you is that young people are so freaking smart, and oftentimes their imagination is not constrained. We as a society constrain that imagination by telling them that won't work, or because this institution exists, we can't have that. And what young people are saying and what they're doing now in the streets is actually saying, no, we can reimagine these things. These institutions don't have to exist in order to provide this level of service, this level of comfort, this level of protection to these communities. And I think that is one of the things that gives me hope that I can retire very soon and just leave all the rest of the hard work to them. But as someone who first started out as a youth activist, a youth advocate at 15, I like to think of myself as now an advocate for youth, making sure that they have the tools, the resources that they need in order to be able to implement the ideas at the scale in which they want to. And so I'm always telling adults and institutions who are trying to engage young people is to really evaluate whether you want to be a bridge or a barrier, right? You can be a bridge to that young person seeing themselves in this position, this role, this opportunity to be able to transform their communities, or you can be a barrier by allowing your negativity, your constraints with how you are operating within this world to define how they show up and the impact that they can make not only for themselves, but also for their communities. And I think we need, in conjunction with young people, is that we need more intergenerational conversations happening with elders, with young people who can really start to think about what is the work of the past, how can we build on top of that to ensure that we can continue to create the world in which we all deserve. And I think we're seeing a lot of that happening with the new and emerging voices that are happening, both at the local level and the national level, because I think young people are very much like, why not? Like, why can't we do these things? Why doesn't this thing exist? And I think that's pretty refreshing in a time and in a world in which we've been told no so often. Or wait our turn.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was just going to add on to that. I turned off my video. I hope that it will help things. I just want to add on that we also need to make space for young people. I talk a little bit about this in my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, because of in many cities where you saw a declining youth population, school-age population, we've shut down many schools, and folks don't realize how much those school buildings mean to community itself, not just for student learning, but they are also, and so many of these abandoned buildings and still provide educational services, still provide recreational services, development services for youth, because when you shut down these public spaces, you really do hurt community development. And so we need strategies to repurpose older schools, older municipal buildings, so that kids also can claim space and develop in them. I'm back.
Yeah, there we go. I just wanted to add, a specific anecdote to some of the points that have just been made. I started off my activism also very young. I was a student, but I'd say I really cultivated it during college, not in the classroom, but actually at my work study job. I was a volunteer classroom assistant, had a variety of different positions over the years at the Henry C. Lee School in West Philadelphia. And some of the smartest people I've never met, and just some of the smartest people I've ever met have actually been my former students. Just one day, we were on a community walk. I was volunteering with some sixth graders to take them on a trip, and they were trying to learn the definitions of the word, I'm forgetting the two specific words, but they were pointing out things that they didn't like in their community and things that they did like in their community. And towards the end of the walk, we got to an apartment building in the quickly gentrifying part of the community. And they said, that apartment building's super cool. It has a pool in there, and that's an attribute of our community. We really, really like to have a pool in every building in our community. And then they sat back and they got these looks on their faces for about 10 seconds. And then they said, I don't know, Miss Anea, not everybody has access to that pool. So maybe it's not that cool. Like, you have to know someone in the building to get in there. And so maybe we should just have more public pools, and maybe we should just have things that everybody can have. And, these are sixth graders. These are 11, 12-year-olds telling me these things. They're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. And to shut out their ideas early on because maybe they don't know how to articulate them quite well, or maybe they need a little more time to process and think, I think it's really such a shame. I've been particularly encountered a lot of, young Black and brown children in my time working at Lee that were able to articulate the injustices that them and their families and their community members were experiencing, and they knew what was going on, and they knew what needed to be changed.
Yeah, and also if we look at every single movement in history, not just here in the US, it has been led mostly by young people. If we think about the civil rights movement, we just lost John Lewis. He was in his late teens, early 20s when he joined the movement. And so I think we all tend, as we get older, we all tend to forget that we were once there and what we had to contribute and how we were shut out. And I think this is a moment in which we can kind of reevaluate how we show up for young people in a more adequate way, an authentic way.
You know, I just wanted also this, you know, send another shout out to John Lewis, because he really paved the way for so many of us. And I see John Lewis's all over the place particularly in this era where young people are really stepping up. So we can't say John Lewis's name enough. Okay.
I think I just want to bring in a point that was just made in the chat. It's not necessarily a question. It's more of a rhetorical question. And also, I just want to add to all the attendees, I'm going to open up for a full Q&A at 11:30. So in 14 minutes. So please, you know, start thinking of any questions that you may want to ask of our panelists. That would be greatly appreciated. But there's a rhetorical question of, how many spaces in Center City do young Black Philadelphians feel like they belong in? One of the skyscrapers in Center City, Liberty Place, actually outlawed, you know, after they had, quote unquote, too many young Black teenagers. When I was back in high school, they set a new limit, an age limit. You have to be 18 or older and you have to have an ID to prove it in order to be in Liberty Place. And me and my friends, we were trying to organize a 1,500 student person walkout in Liberty Place one day, and they kicked us out. And so we are literally cutting youth off. And I remember I went home and I told my mom, and she like marched up to Liberty Place with me the next day and was like yelling at security guards. And one of the security guards in particular who had harassed me, at first, when he saw my face, he was coming back to, you know, speak to me again and to harass me some more. And then he noticed my mother with me. And that's when he respected me. And then that's when he turned away. And so once again, just a quick, you know, personal story of, I think, how youth are commonly shut off in this city.
Actually, public place was created and developed with taxpayer dollars. So it's like, it's their stuff too, right? They pay, young people pay taxes, young people are engaged, like.
Sorry, I'm on mute. So this is a question for both of our panelists. Is there such thing as racial equity? Is that even possible in a country where Black and Brown people are not even at the starting gate of economic and social standing? Do we need to strive for something bigger than equity?
But I can try to tackle that question while for a second. So what I will say is that I also oftentimes it's so funny, a few years ago, we were just talking about equality, right? And that has evolved to a larger conversation around equity. I'm a firm believer that equity is the starting point, right? Can we get to a place in where everyone has access through the unique lens in which they show up in a way in which that benefits the entire community? For me, what I think is larger than equity is the idea of liberation, right? How are we liberating people who are already at the baseline, have the resource, have the opportunity, are treated fairly? We have already got rid of whiteness, because then we could, you know, hopefully get beyond just how whiteness has created this world in which systems are stacked against minorities. But for me, it's about liberation, right? How are we liberating folks to actually be able to live their life, liberty, and their pursuit of happiness, right? How are we ensuring that they feel supported, that they feel celebrated by their differences, by the country in which they call allegiance to, and wherever they show up in the world? And I think that for me is how we can start to reimagine what the world looks like when we don't have to worry about the very basic needs that folks need to have in order to survive in this country, in order to show up in this world as their authentic self.
And I completely agree. I think we're talking to, you know, I know many of you here today, many of you attendees, participants are folks involved in community development, you know, CDCs around Philadelphia. And so I think a lot about how, you know, so much of our work focuses on the urban built environment, and developing a house or developing a particular structure. And that often enough, what we sort of kind of have to move towards is that some of the structures, some of the buildings, some of the property, and I'm talking about property here, isn't necessarily, and we hinted, we talked a little bit about this earlier in the conversation, isn't actually investing in people that we in a lot of ways let ideas of the built environment constrain us and constrain what we think is possible. And so in the area of community development in Philadelphia in particular, are we thinking about, okay, maybe we don't have the tip top state of the art recreation center because we don't have all the money to build that, but how are we building just maybe a plain brick and mortar recreation center, but investing our dollars in people and actual train people with a liberation mindset to go in there and teach youth, or to go in there and work with community members, to go in there and help push political action so we can start to change who is in City Hall. It doesn't all have to be constrained by the built environment.
Yeah, that makes me think back to Dr. Perry's point earlier around, right, we can't just invest in brick and mortar, it would also have to be people. But I think the same thing should be included as we think about institutions and organizations, right? Mm-hmm. So if we had, a lot of times funders, if they're gonna invest in a nonprofit, if they're gonna give money to a particular issue, they give it to a already established organization, or a perceived established organization, I should say. And there's never any investments of the people who are at those organizations, particularly the young people of color, particularly those who are on the front lines, who don't have, who are not getting supported by the institution, and they're not getting supported by their community. But these are the folks who are going to be in this work for the long haul. How are we thinking about their mental health? How are we thinking about their physical health? How are we thinking about what additional professional development that they need in order to adequately show up and do the work? And I think once we start looking at it holistically and not thinking about it in silos, I think then we can create a more comprehensive version of America in the world, than just thinking about like the basic needs.
Definitely. Dr. Perry, I see that you're back. Oh,
back.
Look, popped up. Do you want me to repeat the question so you can take, a whack at it?
Just quickly repeat.
Yeah, okay. So
but yeah, regarding the equity thing, let me just say this, that we should expect policy to get rid of how it privileges whiteness. I mean, that is possible. People know me from my housing research, and they know that appraisals, for instance, are just not working for Black people. I mean, we know that real estate agent behavior is still wanting. We still see steering. So for me, I don't necessarily want perfection. I just want systems to be not built on whiteness, and we can certainly expect that. But I also think that there's a difference between the structural racism that we see and just everyday racism and prejudice, interpersonal stuff. People, I think, conflate the two. We can actually build policy that is equitable in nature, and that does not privilege whiteness. That is very possible. Now, I don't necessarily know in terms of power and privilege and things like that if we'll ever live in a quote unquote racism-free world. But when it comes to getting everything that the federal government should give me, I should expect that, and I should demand it, and we should see change in that respect. So there's lots of things that are achievable in regards to equity, particularly around in housing policy, education, business policy. These things are actually achievable, and so don't let sort of the quest for perfection defeat the good, or something like that. But we can achieve many different things by just scrubbing whiteness from our policy.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to, just like I said in the chat, we're going to open up for Q&A in about 4 to 5 minutes. But just before then, I have my final question. It is specifically for Dr. Perry. And it is, you referenced the rapper and entrepreneur Nipsey Hussle in your book, the late Nipsey Hussle, and his phrase, "Buy Back the Block." And you talk about ownership and collective investment in neighborhoods. A lot of that I think is really important, but can you explain a little bit more how that work can really begin in communities without a successful rapper, you know, entrepreneur, businessman, et cetera, you know, a really wealthy person bankrolling things?
But be mindful that in many areas, not necessarily on the West Coast, but in the East, in the Midwest, and in the South, you don't have to be rich to buy the block. The properties are so devalued. And that's how people do it. They collect family and friends dollars, and they literally buy a block. In my book, I talk about how one person I met named Brian Rice is in Birmingham, bought 8 buildings on a block, and he can't get the money to develop the properties because of biased banking systems. But you can buy back the block. And let's be clear, you hear a lot about Tulsa, Greenwood, Black Wall Street over the last few weeks, few months because of the anniversary and because of Juneteenth. But we've always had people, entrepreneurs, developers, create commercial corridors and communities that really defied sort of racist systems. And we've also had numerous, dozens, hundreds even of explicit attempts to extinguish that strength. We know how to create community. We do, and create thriving communities in spite of policy. And so we just need for, you know, in a different context, for folks to get out of the way and let those communities develop. And so Nipsey Hussle is, I mean, he was one of many people saying, hey, you know, I have some change in my pocket. Why don't I build stores and organizations and commercial corridors that benefits the community and not necessarily benefits one particular white person? How many times have we heard about a developer building some high-rise condo in the hood, and the community can't utilize it, and it actually heightens the pricing of properties around the community and pushes people out? So, but we need more Nipsey Hussles. We need folks who are developing, buying back the block, but we also need for folks to stop trying to squash efforts by Black folk who are community minded.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm going to open it up for the Q&A. I already see some questions rolling in, and since my last question was for Dr. Perry, Jamira, I just want to start with you. An attendee asks, what attracted you to bring your work to the MIT Media Lab? And to all, then I'll read the to all panelists question in a second. But yeah,
they gave me a check. No, I'm joking. But they can give me a check though. No, the work that I do at MIT, I am a Media Lab fellow. So they bring together, I think they're in their 8th or 9th year of conception, where they bring together a group of folks every year from a range of different industries, from government to entertainment to sports and and for me, advocacy, to really think about how we can all, one, in just conversation with each other and in community with each other, really think through what do solutions look like for change? How can we use those spaces to spark new ideas or to better inform the work that we do? I was attracted to that space, particularly because, you know, I'm a firm believer that the issues that are going to transform our communities do not live in silos, right? They're not just for activists to solve, or just for educators to solve, or just for government leaders to solve. We need athletes, we need entertainers, we need scientists, we need people with different ways of viewing the world to be able to reevaluate what are the solutions for change. And so it's been an interesting experience because I've met so many amazing people, but I think more spaces like that need to be cultivated, bringing folks from different backgrounds, not just professions, but also different social and economic backgrounds and ages together to really use those spaces as an opportunity to brainstorm, to communicate, and also to build bridges across industries. So great question.
The same person asks to both panelists, what do you see as the role of technology in advancing community development?
Well, we need technologists because one, it's clearly it's a high growth industry. And so we need more technologists in every field. There's not a single field that is not a tech sector anymore. So one, just from a revenue generating thing, we need more technologists, but we also need applications and technology that serves our needs, and that means we need more developers. Bias in, bias out. You hear this all the time. If the same attitudes that led Derek Chauvin to put his knee casually in the back of the neck of George Floyd are the same attitudes that software developers have, and so there's not a surprise that we see so much algorithmic bias in so many different things. And so my response to that is we certainly need more STEM graduates. We need folks to getting into technology. We need more folks just to learn the basic language around coding. And that's why we need those resources that are robbed from our communities to go back to school, to education and other things. And then I can't say this enough. The defund the police movement is so strong a concept in the sense of when you're investing in policing, you're literally arresting economic mobility. When you invest in, I don't know, a teacher, not only are you building the Black middle class per se, you're also, that person is heightening the human capital of another person. And so you're getting that investment amplified. And so we need this, so we got it on policing, but what else do we need to defund? There's all these areas that we need to shift priority money to really advance economic mobility. And for me, when we talk about where we're going to put these funds, we should be putting funds into the development of STEM talent. As readily we can find a running back in every hood, we can find a technologist in every hood if we invested in it. And so for me, technology is critical.
Yeah, and just to add to that, one, we can divest and defund the military. We spend a lot of our GDP in the military for wars that we're not fighting, and we have a higher investment in the military than all of our allies combined. So that should tell you something, that we are wasting money. And then let's not forget, we haven't found racial justice, but we do have a space force. So if the aliens come, we should all be safe. But in regards to skills, in regards to technology. So I was remiss in the beginning. I work as the head of youth engagement and skills for the Global Business Coalition for Education. And what we know is that we are entering the fourth industrial revolution, which means that technology is going to be at every stage and every level of our lives. With robotics, automation, it's going to be taking jobs. And so we're evaluating what are the skills needed for the fourth industrial revolution. Many of those skills are soft skills, right? How can we teach young people to be critical thinkers, to be problem solvers, to have the entrepreneurial spirit, even if they work within institutions versus creating their own something. But technology skills are still at the forefront. We have to teach young people to look at science and technology as something that isn't just great for a job, but also that can transform how our communities show up. The reason being why many of those different forms of technology comes out and are discriminating against minorities, against women, everything from even like the soap dispenser. If you notice, sometimes it doesn't work. It's because, they only use white hands to do much of the studying of that. So there's so much rooted in every single aspect of our lives, which is why I think, again, we can't look at these issues in silos. We have to include technologists. We have to include business leaders and government leaders at the table as we're reevaluating how technology is going to take over, or not take over our lives. I like to think of it as in a positive way, how they're going to enhance our lives. But we have to ensure that young people are not left out of that development. because we are faced with the largest youth population the world has ever seen. And my generation has already been deemed as not doing better than our parents' generation. And so can you just imagine if this continues, what it will mean for the generation after us, Gen Z, and the generations to come?
Yeah, just a quick point about the military before I read the next two questions, which are related to each other. I saw a really interesting quote on Twitter yesterday that said, oh, sources and government people are estimating that it's going to cost, $22 billion to like fully cover all the things from the pandemic. And somebody replied, that's 3% of the US 2020 military budget. I went across an ocean to Oxford, and there's still a military base within 50 miles of Oxford. There's still a military base. I've moved across an ocean, and there are many military bases in the United Kingdom. And so we have to think more deeply about, while we are discussing the subjugation of Black and brown people in this country, are we also thinking about the oppression that our military forces, the oppression that they do to many people around the world. But I know, a popular one that I commonly think about is, how are we thinking about how Palestinians are oppressed, for example?
Brazilians, right?
Or Brazilians. People from all around the world are being oppressed, and they are Black and they are brown, like many Black and brown Americans. And so just wanted to highlight that point quickly. I know it's not exactly about community development, but this is all related to one another.
No, but it is about community development, because, what's interesting is, whether it's white supremacy, apartheid, colonialism, whatever you choose, the way we've used property and property rights have been a way to suppress Black and brown people all over the world. Obviously, Black people were once owned. And so our relationship to this word assets, it's a little bit different, but the point of the matter is, ownership has been used as a tool in many different places to suppress people who don't own, and so it's important. It's very important.
And to recognize that our military and police have trained police in other parts of the world, like Palestine, like Mexico, like Brazil. So we are actually taking things that do not work here and infusing it around the world, which is devastating even more to other communities of color. And Black people travel, right? The stories of Blackness is a diaspora for a reason. So, yeah.
So the next two questions, I'm gonna read them both, but they're related to each other just because I wanna respect both attendees. Once again, sorry if I mispronounce your name. Majida Rashid asks, recent events have highlighted the importance of knowing our history and living and practicing accordingly, while fulfilling a mission that prioritizes resident-driven goals and objectives and re-educating those that we serve to ensure equitable development. How do we better engage our people to understand and trust the process of community development? Heather Leong replied to that, I have a similar question. What are some steps to make constituents, to meet constituents where they are when working toward equity and justice, when they have been conditioned to hold ideas about their communities that are antithetical to their own liberation?
I'll say this. I don't like any kind of assumption that we are at fault. Even, you hear this all the time, that we've internalized racism, we work against our interests. The reality is that the biased policy has so much more to say about the quality and condition of our neighborhoods. And so for me, it's less about us, and it's more about the practices. I'll give you an example. You hear the term placemaking a lot in community development, how we invest in a place and build it. But one, that verbal waffle is a little deceiving. Places already exist. But we rarely ask the people in communities what they want to see in that community. And because urban planners and architects are not, or there's not a high percentage of Black people in those professions. In fact, there's only, I think, 2 or 3% of all architects are Black. And so when we're building communities, we really don't have Black people in mind. And so that's the problem. You know, when you are engaged with communities, you hear the needs, you see the needs, you recognize them because you're a member of that community. And so for me, when you take the position that people are broken, it really suggests that you're an outsider, and you know, you're being somewhat judgmental in the sense of you're not recognizing the overarching structures that are really suppressing Black life.
Oh, that's so great. I was actually trying to find this meme I came across the other day that was talking about, right, that the conditions in which we all live in, whether we're talking about minority communities, more specifically Black folks, or even the larger community, is not done by happenstance, right? These things don't just come because they're natural to society. It was developed because of institutions and systems placated and created the world in which we live. And so it's easy at times to blame individuals, right? To ask them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But if the society itself didn't cultivate a space for them to get bootstraps in the first place, how can you blame them for not being able to show up the way in which you think is adequate? And so the meme that I was looking for was basically saying to name the systems, right? Instead of naming people or how they have been oppressed, or even their trauma by being oppressed by these institutions, we actually have to name the institution that cultivated this oppression and the problems in which we need to solve in order to cultivate a better space for those individuals to be able to live and thrive. So yeah, I mean, and this is something that I also had to learn or unlearn as I got more involved, is recognizing that, you know, people are not poor because they're lazy. People are not educated because they don't want to learn.
Right.
We're talking about generational trauma that is still weighing very heavily on a lot of folks who don't feel like they're ever going to get the support that they need because of institutions.
Yeah, before I read our last question, just want to say I completely support all of that. I think if we think that Black and brown people that we're working with are holding ideas that are quote unquote, you know, against their liberation, then we need to more deeply think about why we are thinking that. I think there's a habit, once again, of blaming people for their own oppression. Not saying completely blaming, but crediting part of it to them. And yeah, just think more deeply about that, definitely. An anonymous attendee asks, what are some of the ways that bureaucracy prevents us from equity and liberation and community development?
Well, let me tell you, there's nothing more bureaucratic than racism. We've built system after system after system, and racism is a drag on the economy. I mean, it is literally like holding the economy down. People don't understand is that we throttle growth when with these racist systems. So for me, people will say, look at these bureaucratic schools or bureaucratic. No, there's nothing more bureaucratic than racism. We built entire systems on maintaining white strength and maintaining whiteness. I mean, and it is almost, I mean, it's expensive and time wrenching just to deal with all these structures all the time. So for me, let's not get it twisted. The bureaucracy you see in HUD or education have nothing on white supremacy, nothing.
Yeah, and the bureaucracies are oftentimes created to support the continuation of white supremacy, right? It makes no sense that oftentimes, in order for you to get access to a resource and opportunity, you have to do things that are actually that shouldn't exist, right? When we think about voting rights, how Black folks had to take a reading test, or they had to be able to answer a series of questions, literacy questions, in order to justify their ability to vote, right? On the surface, some people would say that makes sense. No, it actually doesn't. And so I think bureaucracy is the justification for institutions to continue to oppress communities of color and to allow themselves to make it appear as if they're trying to hold folks accountable, when really they're trying to limit those from being able to access either that resource, that opportunity, that funding to maintain or to transform their community. So yeah, bureaucracy is BS in many ways. And I say this as someone who's worked in government some people participate in the process, other people don't, depending on who you know, what you look like, you may or may not have to, jump through those hoops in order to get what you need.
And this, we can't say this enough, everything from credit scoring systems to home buying things to, there's so many structures in place that were literally built to keep Black people out. and those structures are still in place. If we trusted Black people, I don't know how many rules would go away, but there are thousands of rules edified and codified in the law that were predicated on not trusting Black people. Black people are too risky. They don't deserve resources, all these different things. And if we learn to begin to trust Black people, you'll see a lot less bureaucracy. But let's be clear, a lot of the bureaucracy that's just coded language for the protection of white supremacy in many cases.
Okay, well, thank you so much to the both of you for answering everybody's questions, for answering some of the questions that I had. I'd like to thank all of the attendees for also being here with us in this conversation today. I know I really enjoyed it, definitely wrote down some quotes that I heard from the two of you just in the background. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Pam to explain the next steps.
Thank you, Anea. Thank you, Jamira. Thank you, Dr. Perry. You guys, just incredible. I just wanted to quickly, so thank you very much for, it was a delight to hear you. Part of me was like, oh my God, this is so, I might get fired for this. But on the other side, I was like, yeah, this is what we said we wanted. We wanted this. We wanted to mix it up. We wanted people to be like charged and excited.
You won't get fired. You're going to be all right.
And so we'll burn it down.
Exactly. We got your back.
I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, all my board of directors. But it's cool because everything you said throughout the entire course were things that our members were saying, our board members were saying, but not necessarily in the way that you said it. It was like, yeah, that was right. I've heard that before. And these are by people who, from all walks of life, but that were deeply engaged in their neighborhoods and being part of what was positive about their neighborhoods and making real change. So I thank you for helping to continue to uplift that conversation and helping to encapsulate it for a lot of people and maybe introducing some new vocabulary and some new way of thinking to people who are newer to this, newer to these struggles, or maybe not quite understanding the vocabulary as well as you articulated. Thank you all for the people who are still on the line with us. We really appreciate having you with us. Please know that we will start. We're going into a little brief break for about 15 minutes or so. And then at 12 noon, we'll be starting our workshops. The first they'll be running concurrently. So you'll have your choice of which workshop you want to attend. And if you look in your chat box, you'll be able to see links to each one of those workshops, and you can click onto any of those workshops and access them. If you decide that you go to a workshop and you might not like it, or you want to step away for a minute, that's perfectly fine. You can go back to your original email invitation or your original email reminder that also has the links to the workshops. Those workshops include adding inclusion to Philadelphia's oh-so-white development and construction industry, community impact through arts and cultural engagement, and real estate strategies for neighborhood preservation. Thank you all very much for joining us again. Dr. Perry, Ms. Burley, Ms. Moore, thank you. You shut it down, and I'm so proud of you and so grateful to you. So thank you all very, very much. And Dr. Perry, I got your book. I ordered that joint on Amazon. I've been going through it. I've been circling. I'm emailing people saying, yeah, look what Andre said. Look what Andre said. So good. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
So you got my $21. Oh no, $20. I don't know how much of that $20 you got, but you got
$24.99 or whatever. I know my price.
Yeah, you got to split that with Jeff Bezos, right?
Exactly.
Thank you all very much. Be safe, be well, and continue to fight the fight, y'all. Thank you.
Likewise. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.